Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is Barry Odell with the Mammoth Spring Church of Christ, our YouTube channel. It is Monday afternoon, July 7th, 2025. Hope everybody's doing all right today. We are ready for John chapter 18. Connie, Sheila, good to see you guys. If you join on the stream, say hello in the live chat. Give the video a thumbs up if you would, please. As always, I'm recording the audio to be uploaded to our Podbean channel, and the YouTube link will be shared with our Church of Christ at Mammoth Spring Facebook page. So this content can be interacted with in all of those ways. Busy week here at Mammoth Spring. We've got our Vacation Bible School going on, and we've got different speakers each night for the adults. Those classes will be streamed on our Facebook page. And the good news is I am not one of those speakers. Everybody gets a break from me. We've got, let me think here for a second. One of our elders is teaching one night. Another one of our members is teaching another, I don't remember the nights. But anyway, and then the preacher from the Pilot Church of Christ, Jeff Lancaster, which he fills in for me pretty well, usually, when I'm not here on Wednesday night or something like that. And then one of the elders from the Pilot Church of Christ will be teaching one night. So that'll be a good break for me. I'll be going around taking pictures and things like that, but it'll be a good break for the congregation here too. So if you'd like to watch those classes, they'll start, it's approximately like 6:45-ish. Because we'll get in the audit. Well, we'll probably stream the singing too. But anyway, let's say 6:30 on our church's Facebook page. All right, so John chapter 18 is where we are tonight. I don't know if you're going to hear noises. There are folks here in the building working. That's perfectly fine. I told them what I'm doing. I know what they're doing. So what happens, happens. Yeah, I get to sit and listen. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that at all. All right. So back in John 17 and verse 1, Jesus said, "My hour has come," and that's where we begin here today in John chapter 18. I was going to share a screen, a window, so you could see my computer screen with a PowerPoint showing the chronology of the trials of Jesus, because he goes through 6 trials. He goes through 3 religious trials. He goes before Annas, and then Caiaphas, and then the Sanhedrin. And then he goes into 3 civil trials. He goes to Pilate initially, and then Pilate sends him to Herod, and then Herod sends him back to Pilate, and of course that's when Jesus is ultimately sent to death. But I just couldn't do that. I've got a Bible app open, I've got the streaming software open, and I've got a recording app open. So anyway, if you would like that information, I can get it to you, but I'm not gonna window share it today. All right, my plan is to cover the first 27 verses of John chapter 18 today. This is, man, I tell you what, I don't know how many times I've read the Gospels and read these accounts of what he endured, but I don't know how you can read those and not have an emotional response to what he went through. And not in just one location, multiple places with large numbers of brutal people. Tough, but it was for us. Hey, Lyle, good to see you. All right. Let's get started. When Jesus had spoken these words, this referring to the prayer that we read in John chapter 17, he went out with his disciples over the brook Kidron, where there was a garden which he and his disciples entered. Now, of course, we know, now John doesn't say it here, but this would be the Garden of Gethsemane, and we are told that this is a place that he would often go, we'll read that here in just a second, with his disciples and pray. Place of solitude. In fact, I have a little map here. Well, I've got several images that I will show you today, but I've got a map of the area. I know it's not a great image, but it had on there one I wanted to see it. So the Mount of Olives is just outside of the temple area, just outside of the of that region. If you will give me just 1 second, I need to take this call. All right. Sorry about that. I had to take that call. Just didn't know when it was coming. So there you go. All right. So there's a map of Jerusalem, the Temple Mount, and then you see the Mount of Olives. You see the Kidron Valley, the Garden of Gethsemane. So it's not far outside of the city. Just interesting to know. Connie says, if anyone has watched The Passion of Christ, it really lets you see what Christ went through. And I dare anyone to watch it and not need a hanky or two. Yeah. We took a group. I can't remember the year that movie came out, but we took a group in Pensacola and went to the movie theater and watched it. And wow. That movie was very well done. And so far as I can tell, faithful to the biblical text. But anyway, there's a little map of where Jesus and his disciples are. And as I said, Judas, verse 2 here, knows this place because Jesus often met there with his disciples. The city would be busy. There'd be people everywhere. This would be a little place of quiet, little place of what would you call it? Peace, where he could do some teaching, praying, things like that. Now, Gethsemane, the word itself means oil press. It was known for its olive orchards, and so just a bit of information. But the word Gethsemane that we have in English, that's actually the Greek term. They just pulled the Greek letters and made it into an English word. But the definition of the term is oil press. Just a bit of information. I won't charge you anything for that. Judas having received a detachment. Now this is significant to me. The other three gospel writers, and I have it written here in the margin of my Bible, Matthew 26:47 and Mark 14:43, both of those passages say that Judas came with a great multitude and they had swords and clubs. Luke 22:47 just says it was a multitude. John here uses a term, it's I don't know if you'd say it's borrowed from the Romans, but it's what it is. It's a Roman military term. It's a detachment of troops, as it says here. I think the King James says a band of troops, but it's 500 to 600 soldiers. I want you to think about that for just a minute. You've got Judas, you've got some of the officers, the high priests, verse 3, officers from the chief priests and Pharisees came there with lanterns, torches, and weapons. We're talking hundreds of men to arrest Jesus, and not just men, trained soldiers. So as he's going through these events, the trials, he's taking a beating from these soldiers, men who are trained in inflicting punishment and pain on people. All right, don't lose sight of that. I've got some other images here that I want to show you. Take a minute just to let you see that are artists' conceptions of the betrayal of Jesus by Judas. Here's the first one I'll show you. Just some interesting takes on what it looked like. Of course, Judas approached him with a kiss. Here's another one. I don't know the artist, I don't know the era, but just notice the looks on their faces and how whoever the artist was took time to, on each of the soldiers' faces and Judas's face, you notice the eyebrows are kind of down and the brow is wrinkled. It's just an interesting conception of what it could have looked like. Here's another image. You see the clubs raised in the air, Judas kissing him in his betrayal. And then I have this image here. It's just interesting to look at the artist's conception of what happened that night and to think about the fact that Jesus chose Judas, that Judas, as I've said before, had just as much power and authority as Peter himself did. And he did this. Sheila says it takes real evil to betray someone with a kiss. Yeah, and the gospel writers say, or record Jesus saying, friend. Jesus calling Judas friend when he does this. 600. I wonder what they thought he was going to do. Well, John actually records something for us that perhaps, knowing who Jesus was, we'll see that here in just a minute. So you have this detachment of troops, 500 to 600 soldiers, to arrest one man. Jesus, therefore, knowing all things, verse 4, had come upon him, went forward. Okay, notice that. John 18:4. He doesn't hide from this. He knows it's coming. Whom are you seeking? He knows who they're seeking. This is for them. He doesn't ask questions seeking information. We're seeking Jesus of Nazareth, and he said to them, I am. And again, you will notice here the The he is italicized, and so he simply says, I am. And Judas was right there, verse 5. And notice the response. When he said to them, I am, they drew back and fell to the ground. Now, there's speculation among commentators. Did Jesus knock them down? Was there some... I was reading one commentary that this writer was putting forth the idea that some kind of force emanated from Jesus and forced them to the ground. John's the only one who records this, and there's nothing in the text to indicate that. Why did they fall to the ground? Well, one thing that I think of is like Isaiah's response to seeing Christ on the throne in Isaiah chapter 6. We know it's Jesus, or the Word, because of what we're told in John 12:41, but Isaiah, seeing him, he said his response was, woe is me. And anytime you have this appearance of the divine, the humans don't just run up and act nonchalantly or anything like that. They fall down. They worship. They drew back and fell to the ground. It sounds like they did it of their own accord. Did they know his reputation, the miracles? I don't know. I mean, if these are Roman soldiers, but it also includes officers from the chief priests and Pharisees, and they know what Jesus has been doing. They knew Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead and all of these other signs. I don't know, but that's just an interesting little statement there in John 18 and verse 6. He asked them again, who are you seeking? Jesus of Nazareth. I have told you that I am. Therefore, if you seek me, let these go their way. That's an interesting little request for the mob here, the great multitude, to allow the disciples to leave, which they did. That the saying might be fulfilled, of those whom you gave me, I have lost none. Nobody died here. And that's obviously what that's referring to. Judas left of his own accord. Jesus didn't lose Judas. Judas left of his own accord. And of those that God gave him, he didn't lose any. Simon Peter. Now, this is interesting because when you look at the other gospel accounts and what happens here, let me do this real quick. I'm going to go over to Matthew's account, Matthew 26, and it's around verse 50-ish, somewhere in that neighborhood. Okay, so Matthew records here, Judas greets him with a kiss, Matthew 26:49, friend, why have you come? Then they came and laid hands on Jesus. So that little interaction of who are you seeking, that doesn't happen here. Judas said, I'll identify him with a kiss. Suddenly, one of those who were with him stretched out his hand and drew his sword, struck the servant of the high priest, and cut off his ear. Put your sword in your place, for all who take the sword will perish by the sword. And so remember back in John 17:1, my hour has come. Well, this is it. And Peter, you remember back, what was it? Back in John, where was it? The end of John 13. John 13:37, Lord, why can I not follow you now? I will lay down my life for your sake. And as far as I can tell here in John chapter 18 and verse 10, that's exactly what he meant. Now, think about it like this. What do you think Peter was intending to cut off here when he draws his sword and hits the guy in the ear? He was not aiming for the ear. I think he was aiming for the neck. He's trying to kill this man. John's the only one who tells us that his name is Malchus. Put up your sword, or put your sword into the sheath. Shall I not drink the cup which my Father has given me? This is not the time nor the place. This is not what you're supposed to do, Peter. I have no doubt that Peter was sincere when he said that back in John 13. I'll lay down my life if I have to. Why else would he draw one sword when there are 500 soldiers there with clubs and swords and lanterns? I think he believed what he said, and the fact, I'm just thinking about this from the position of having fought. I've been in many fights over the years, in competitions and things. Your adrenaline gets pumping, especially early on when I first started. I'd be a nervous wreck, and you're a little bit out of control. You're a little bit more emotional than you need to be, and the longer and longer I fought, it got to the point where when it was time, I was just calm and I was just ready to go. I had more emotional control, and you're better off that way. I think that may be why he hit the ear instead of the neck. He was just emotionally distraught, scared, nervous, and you just start swinging. It doesn't usually turn out too good. that way. But he's rebuked here, put your sword up. This is not the purpose. And there's an interesting phrase here, shall I not drink the cup which my Father has given me? If you remember, back in Matthew chapter 20, the mother of the sons of Zebedee came to Jesus and said, I want one son on your right hand, one on your left, when you come into your kingdom. And he said to them, to the men, can you drink of the cup that I'm about to drink of? Well, this is what he's talking about. When you go back and read Matthew 20, it's like verses 20 through 28, somewhere in there. He's talking about the cup of suffering. The baptism that he was going to be baptized with was the baptism of suffering. And that's where we are now. Just some interesting connections to make in Scripture. All right. He's arrested, taken by the, as John notes, the detachment of troops, the speron, that's the Greek term, again, 500 to 600 soldiers, taken by the troops and the captains and the officers of the Jews, arrested Jesus and bound him. They take him to Annas first, for he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was high priest that year. Now it was Caiaphas who advised the Jews that it was expedient that one man should die for the people. Now verse 14 is a comment that John makes, an inspired comment that John makes, and it goes back to, I'll just click over there real quick. It goes back to John chapter 11 when Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, and they're trying, the enemies of Jesus are trying to decide, what do we do with this guy? Let's see here. Yeah, John 11:49. Caiaphas, being high priest that year, said to them, you know nothing at all, nor do you consider that it is expedient for us that one man should die for the people, and not that the whole nation should perish. Okay. If there's some sort of uproar here, again, when Jesus raises Lazarus, the Romans are going to come in and they're going to crush us. Caiaphas knew that. And so the advice is let's bide our time. We'll get Jesus eventually. And he says that again as the high priest. Well, that's why John says what he says in John 18:14, reminding us of who Caiaphas was. This is not Jesus' first interaction with this man, or that man's with Jesus, for that matter. So, first trial during the night is with Annas, and then Caiaphas. And again, so let me see if I can find it here in the back of my Bible real quick. I didn't have the, I don't know if I have the bandwidth to open up PowerPoint along with everything else I have running here right now. Hey, David, good to see you today, man. All right, so he's taken to Annas. That's only recorded by John. No other gospel writer records that. The trial before Caiaphas is recorded by all four writers. And then he goes before the Sanhedrin, and Matthew, Mark, and Luke record that. He goes to Pilate for the first time. All four writers record that. Only Luke tells us about the trial before Herod. That's in Luke 23, verses 6 through 12. And then again, all four gospel writers tell us about Jesus' second trial before Pilate, and that, of course, is ultimately when he is turned over to the Jews. Basically, the Romans give the Jews authority to enact the death sentence in regard to Jesus. So we're getting close here. It's a matter of hours. He's going to be up all night going through these trials, taking the beatings. Well, you'll see it start here in just a minute. So let's go ahead and move on here to John 18:15. Peter now denies Jesus. This is John 18. Oh, it's from verses 15 through 18, and then it starts again in verse 25. There's like a little interlude there. So he follows Jesus. Now, notice what we're told here. He follows Jesus, and so did another disciple. Most people believe that this other disciple was John. Throughout his gospel, he refers to himself in this, I guess you'd say in this way, anonymously. Doesn't say his name or anything like that, but when you get into John chapter 20, it appears to me a little more evident as to who we're talking about, because this is when he's been raised from the dead, and Peter and the other disciple, there's that same language, but it's specified here whom Jesus loved. Well, that's John. They are together here, so it seems pretty reasonable that it's Peter and John who are together when Jesus is arrested and taken to trial. Peter therefore went out and the other disciple, and they went to the tomb. They ran to the tomb together. The other disciple outran Peter and came to the tomb first. He looked in, but Peter went in. So you can connect those passages, John 20, verses 2 through 6, with John 18 and verse 15. Seems to make sense to me that that's Peter and John going together. Then we are told, back to John 18:15, that John, if that is who this disciple is, knew the high priest, or was known by the high priest, and went with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest. So he's right there. Peter, I believe it's Luke's gospel that tells us that Peter followed at a distance. And John tells us that, again, if it's him, that he went into the courtyard of the priest with Jesus. Peter stood outside the door. The other disciple went out, who was known to the high priest, went out and spoke to her who kept the door and brought Peter in. So it's just interesting to see how all of this plays out, that where are the other 9? Well, they have scattered. Peter, we know his character and how he is. He's right there, but he's a little bit in the background. But John, the one to whom Jesus, ultimately on the cross, gives the responsibility of taking care of his mother, he's right there by his side the whole time. I don't think we're told that enough. That thinking about John's relationship with Jesus, it's interesting to think about. So now Peter's brought in with John. They can see, and I'm sure hear, what's going on with Jesus. But this servant girl who kept the door said to Peter, aren't you one of his followers? Aren't you one of his students? That word disciple means a student or a pupil. I'm not. Now the servants and officers who had made a fire of coals stood there, for it was cold, and they warmed themselves, and Peter stood with them and warmed himself. The interesting thing is, John's account starts telling what happens to Peter, but then it's like it's flashing from scene to scene, kind of like a movie. Now we go inside and we're hearing about the high priest. So let's jump. I want to jump to, in John's account, down to verse 25, and then we'll come back. So he's already denied once when the girl who's keeping the door asked him. Simon Peter stood there and warmed himself, that we just read about back up in verse, what verse was it? 17, 18. Yeah, verse 18. Peter's right there with them. Are you not one of his disciples also? I'm not. One of the servants of the high priest, a relative, listen to this, a relative of him whose ear Peter cut off. Malchus's whatever, cousin, brother, whatever. Didn't I see you in the garden? Well, that event would stand out. Peter then denied again, and immediately a rooster crowed. An interesting thing to note here, and I wrote this down somewhere, but when you go back to the other gospel accounts, let me see if I can find it just quickly here. Okay, yeah, Matthew 26, it starts in verse 69. Matthew, Mark, and Luke all say something to this effect. This is Matthew 26:73. A little later, those who stood by came up and said to Peter, surely you also are one of them, for your speech betrays you. Now, if you give me just a second, I'm going to pull up my Bible app here, because there's an indication as to exactly what that means. All right, what am I looking at? Matthew 26 and verse 73. What does it mean, your speech betrays you? So this word for speech here, let's see, speech, lalia is the term, and it literally means the way you pronounce your words. We would say that today in America. Hey, your accent. Aren't you from Galilee? That's the gospel writers record that too. Your accent is Galilean. And so he's there, he's watching this, and the guy who says this now, back to John chapter 18, the relative of Malchus, weren't you in the garden with him? They know. It seems that they know. I saw you. Weren't you there? Peter denies it again, and immediately the rooster crowed. Luke's account says that when that happened, Jesus turned and looked at him, and then Peter went out and wept bitterly. So you have the denial, the threefold denial of Christ here in John 18. And again, all of your other gospel writers record that for us too. All right, now let's see what happened between that initial denial, when the girl who kept the door asked him, and then the final two. Like I said, John kind of shifts scenes on us. And so, then the high priest asked Jesus about his disciples and his doctrine. And here's the thing. They know his disciples. They know his doctrine. And he says that. I spoke openly to the world. I always taught in the synagogues and in the temple. And he spoke, so Matthew 23, when he spoke in the temple, that's not long before all these events. That's just a matter of days before what is happening here happens. Everybody knows what he taught. Everybody knows what he did. I mean, even his enemies said, if we don't stop this guy, the whole world's going to go after him. The Jews always meet there. I've not said anything in secret. That is, in terms of his doctrine in general. There were some things that he told only to his disciples. But he's just saying, I've not hidden anything from you about who I am or what I teach. Why do you ask me? Ask those who have heard me. They know what I said. So that's kind of you might say that's kind of a rebuke of an answer. All you have to do is ask around. Everybody knows what I've said. You know what I've said. Notice the response. This is where it just starts here. This is just the beginning. When he said these things, one of the officers who stood by struck Jesus with the palm of his hand, saying, "Do you answer the high priest like that? You going to be mouthy like that?" Now, like I said, I spent several years in fighting, stand-up fighting, full contact. Do not slap me in the face. Okay, I'd rather be punched. I've been punched in the face, kicked in the face. That's fine. Open hand slap, that's a different story. That's an insult. And that stings. You know, a punch to the head's kind of a dull, I mean, it hurts, sure. But a smack in the mouth, that's not going to go well. Okay, so that makes me think about this passage because we're called to be like Jesus. So let me go to 1 Peter chapter 2. And starting in verse 21, "For to this you were called, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example that we should follow in his steps, who committed no sin, neither was deceit found in his mouth, who, when he was reviled, did not revile in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but committed himself to him who judges righteously." He took, and I don't know exactly what happened before this, but a smack in the mouth, a smack across the face with an open hand, that's an insult. Absolutely. Jesus answered and said, "If I have spoken evil, bear witness of the evil. If I said something I shouldn't have said, fine." And that's the mentality that Paul had. You go to Acts 25 and read verse 11. He says there, "If I have done anything worthy of death, I refuse not to die." These guys are bold. Do whatever you need to do if I've done something wrong. But if I've done what's right, if I've done well, why do you strike me? Again, that's a rebuke. Just like the verse 21 was, ask everybody around. They know what I said. That's a rebuke. Then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. So he's been through one trial. The beating has already started. This is going to go on literally all night long. It does not stop. And again, we have to remember that he is surrounded by soldiers. All right? These are professional killers. These men are brutal. And he's outnumbered hundreds to one. Now, we know what he was capable of, but we also know that he's not going to do this because what is happening here is the Father's will. This is all part of God's scheme, eternal scheme of redemption. But it's just getting started here. And what he goes through is just, it's not hard to read, but it's hard not to get emotional when you read it. Just thinking about what he went through. And not just what he went through again, but what he's capable of doing because of who he is. He is God in the flesh. And it's just like he says at one point in his trials and the crucifixion and all that, I could call 12 legions of angels. A legion, now that's another Roman term, like we've talked about here, the detachment of troops from John 18:3, approximately 500 to 600 soldiers. A legion of Roman soldiers was 6,000. So when Jesus says I could call 12 legions of angels, he's saying I could call 72,000 angels instantaneously, and this would all be over. Think about that. Think about that when you read things like he's being slapped in the face and spit on and punched Yeah. David says, after Acts 2, Peter and the other apostles were different men, not perfect, but bold and devoted. Yeah. And Peter was always bold, but he was not, he often didn't follow up with it, just as is the case right here. But yeah, after the resurrection and ascension, there was nothing you could do to stop these men. Well, you had to kill them. That's what you had to do. Hey, Alabama, good to see you. We have no idea what all was done to Jesus when they led him off. That's right. I mean, we're told a few things. I can't imagine having a cohort of men slapping, hitting, punching, spitting on me, and more. He was brutalized beyond imagination. Yeah, so Isaiah, just by way of example, I think it's the end of Isaiah chapter 52. I want you to listen to how this describes what happens to Jesus here. Let's see. Isaiah 52 and verse 13. Behold, my servant shall deal prudently. He shall be exalted and extolled and be very high. Just as many were astonished at you, so his appearance was marred, disfigured is the Hebrew term. His appearance was disfigured more than any man, and his form more than the sons of men. Some of the older, I remember there was a movie, I think it was called King of Kings, older movie about Jesus, and he takes a beating. Like I said, the Passion of the Christ is probably the most accurate depiction of what happened to him physically, but I don't know that was even close to what he looked like. You couldn't recognize him. It's crazy to think about. Yeah, to be spit on was a very bad insult. Still is. It still is. But it's not, and again, it's not just one or two guys hitting and spitting on him. It's everybody that's there. It's everybody. And he went through that for me. And he went through that for you. Think about that. All right, guys. That's what I've got for today. John 18, 1 through 27. We're just getting started on this trials and his suffering. I may try to do a little more parallelism as we go throughout these events, give you more chronology from the other gospel writers, just to put in focus his suffering started way before the cross. All right, just remember that. Way before the cross. That's ultimately where it ended. But he's gone through hour after hour after hour of severe beating and public humiliation. Scourging. I'll have some pictures of scourging too, because it's something to think about. If you ever wonder, if your mind ever wanders during the Lord's Supper, John chapter 19, let me see here real quick. I believe John 19 is 40 or 42 verses. And a habit that I have made over the years, and I don't do it every Lord's Day, but a habit that I've tried to maintain over there, it's 42 verses, is when I partake of the unleavened bread, I read the first half of John 19, and when I partake of the fruit of the vine, I read the second half. Just to help you keep your mind focused. All right, guys, I appreciate you being here today. Like I said, we'll be live tonight. I'll start the stream at 6:30-ish, but the class itself will begin approximately 6:45 for our Vacation Bible School, so you can be looking forward to that. I appreciate you guys being here today. I appreciate the interaction, the back and forth. Share this content. If you haven't done so, give the video a thumbs up. I would appreciate it. It'll be on our Facebook page, and it'll be on our Podbean app. Appreciate you guys very much, and hope to see you back here tomorrow at 2 o'clock.